and flame.
Oh my God, so I'm like getting the fire right.
Good morning. Good morning and welcome to First Unitarian Universalist Church of Nashville. We have a festive mood this morning. Good morning. I'd like you to I am Jay Tiefenbrunn. I am your Director of Music Ministries. And I'm really pleased to be your Director of Music Ministries. I'd like to invite you to channel all that energy into our morning songs with number 20, Be Thou My Vision, hymn number 20 in the gray hymnal. Please rise in body or in spirit as you're so moved, or prepare for singing Be Thou My Vision. Be thou my vision, O God of my heart, not be all close to me, save that thou art. Thou my best thought by day or by night, waking or sleeping, thy presence my light. Be thou my wisdom and thou my true word. I never with thee and thou with me, God. Thou my soul's shelter, thou my high tower. Raise thou me heavenward, O power of my power. Riches I heed not, nor world's empty praise. Thou my inheritance now and always. Thou and thou only in my heart. Sovereign of heaven, my treasure thou art. Our second song this morning is number 287, Faith of the Larger Liberty. Number 287. Faith of the larger liberty, source of the light expanding, law of the church that is to be, all bondage notwithstanding. Faith of the free, by thee we live, by all thou givest and shalt give, our loyalty commanding. Heroes of faith in every age, foreseeing, self-denying, wrought and increasing heritage, monarch and creed defying. Faith of the free, in thy dear name, the costly heritage we claim, their living and their dying. Faith for the people everywhere, whatever their oppression, of all who make the world more fair, living their faith's confession. Faith of the free, whate'er our plight, thy law, thy liberty, thy light shall be our blessed possession. Our third song this morning comes from a couplet by Rumi, Come, Come, Whoever You Are, number 188. There is also an ostinato part with this that I would like to teach you, and you can self-select whether you participate in the round as it's printed in the group or you maintain that ostinato. Holling, would you give us a key? The ostinato goes like this. Though you've broken your vows 1,000 times, 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 though you've broken your vows. Keep singing. Group 1, Group 2, Group 3, and Group 4. All together. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again, come. Come, come, whoever you are. 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 Though you've broken your vow 1,000 times, though you've broken your vow 1,000 times, though you've broken whoever you are, come, come, whoever you are, come, come, whoever you are, come, come, whoever you are, come yet again, come yet again, come yet again, come. Good morning. Please take a moment to greet each other.
In the presence of this spark, we are committed to light the fire of passion, of life, of holy work, to journey towards truth on sacred ground.
I'd like to introduce our speaker this morning. For those of you who do not know, the Reverend Dr. Laurel Cassidy, because some of you know her. She's been a member here since 1993. There's more about her in the order of service, but you get to see her in those brief periods when she's in the country because she works for Doctors Without Borders, and so we're just thrilled to have her here today. Welcome, Laurel. Thank you.
And now for our opening words. Our many different paths come together this morning in this special place, graced not only by the history of those who have sat in these pews before us, but also by our shared faith. Let us be mindful of forces deep within which call us to become more than we are. May this hour bring rest and renewal, comfort and challenge. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolate beings, but that we are connected in mystery and in miracle to the universe, to this community, and to one another. Amen.
Morning. So we are going to invite you to join us. This is a meditation song that we're going to do for y'all. And if you turn to the music note in the book, or I can just tell you what you're going to be saying, it's Om Mane Padme Hum. Can you guys try that? Om Mane Padme Hum. Yeah, one more time. Om Mane Padme Hum. That's it. That's that over and over. Another ostinato. So what we're going to do is, this is our little bass section. They're going to be singing that, and you guys can do it the entire song with them if you feel compelled to. All right?
Good morning. Well, I want to tell you a story about a very wise woman named Athanerva. Now, Athanerva would go from town to town in her country, staying in each town maybe a few days, maybe up to a week. And people would come to her with problems they were having or arguments they were having with others, and she would help them figure out the right answers or the right thing to do. Well, one day, as she entered one of the towns on her circuit, she saw a group of people and heard loud voices in argument. One of the people in the group looked up and saw her and said, "Athanerva, come over here. We need your wisdom now." So Athanerva went over to the group, and the person who had called out to her said, "Athanerva, I need your help. I've been telling these people who God is, and they tell me I'm wrong. I'm worried about them. Can you set them straight, tell them what is right? And Athanerva said, well, what have you been telling them? I've told them that there is one true God who loves us, cares for us, hears our prayers, and commands us to love one another all the time. And Athanerva said, you are correct. What? Said the others. No, that can't be right. One of them said, well, I believe there's a God, all right, one who created the universe, established the laws governing it, set it all going, and left. God has no interest in the affairs of humankind. It's up to us to create the world we want to be. Well, said the third, I believe there are lots of gods and goddesses, and they play an important part in my worship of all of nature and the cycle of life. And Athanerva said, and you were correct. Well, the fourth one said, well, I'm not sure there is a God at all. I see a divine spark in everyone and everything, but I don't know, maybe that's just part of human consciousness. And Athanerva said, you're correct. Well, the fifth one said, I don't believe there is a God at all. But I have to admit, I am absolutely awestruck when I think about the mystery of this universe and its creation and how we all came to be. I believe it's my responsibility to leave my small quarter of the world better place than I found it. And Athanerva said, you are correct. Well, at this point, everyone was very confused. Athanerva, how can we all be correct when we all have different ideas about who God is or isn't? Yes, you all have different visions, but each one of your visions can lead you to love and care for one another and this beautiful part of creation we call Earth. And that's the correct vision, no matter how you label it. And as Athanerva turned to leave, the folks in that group decided they really didn't need to be arguing with each other about who was right. They needed to work together to make the world a better place. And here ends our story. We're going to sing the children out with the hymn or the song that's in the back cover of your gray hymnal.
May your minds be open to new learning. May your lips bring truth into the world. May your hearts know love and your hand do the work of justice as you go your way in peace. As you go your way in peace.
Good morning. My name is Rachel Rogers. I'm a member of this congregation. I serve on the worship committee and on the board as program council chair. It is my pleasure to welcome you here in the sanctuary and those joining us online to worship this morning. In order to reach a wider community than those able to be physically present on Sunday morning, our services are live streamed on YouTube and Facebook. Joys and concerns are not live streamed or recorded. Before I continue, let me remind you to silence your cell phones. As Unitarian Universalists, our spiritual paths vary, but in this congregation we have made a covenant together. We affirm our interdependence, celebrate our differences, and work for justice. We are a welcoming congregation, and we deepen our relationships as we serve our congregation's mission to create community, nurture spiritual growth, and act on our values in the broader world, guided by reason and compassion. I want to extend a special welcome to visitors worshiping with us this morning. We ask you to wear the paper name tags because it helps us recognize you as someone we'd like to meet. If you are seeking a spiritual home, we hope that you may find it here. Whether you are new to Unitarian Universalism or visiting from another UU congregation, we invite you to stop by the welcome table after the service to have questions answered. All are welcome to attend our church, and people become members of this congregation by signing the membership book and supporting the church with their time and finances. If you are considering joining the church, please talk to our minister, Gail Seavey. Following the service, we hope everyone will enjoy coffee and fellowship in the social hall, where you will also find information about current opportunities for engagement and reflection. There are many announcements in the weekly bulletin, which I hope you will take home and read, and I have been asked to highlight 2 more. A reminder, today at 10:30, the Environmental Action Team in ACT will be holding another short conversation session, 30 minutes max, to share ideas for more sustainable holidays. It will be in the fireside room. We hope to see you there. Also, the 20s and 30s group is meeting today at 12:30 p.m. in Classroom A for their monthly lunch. Come join us for food and fellowship.
Good morning. Well, like many of you, I grew up in a conservative Christian church that explained God in very specific terms. Also, like many of you, as I grew into adulthood, I realized that the teaching of the church of my childhood no longer spoke to my soul or provided the guidance I was seeking in life. I spent several years as a young adult letting go of the baggage I had collected, wondering if there was a place where I could rebuild my faith with meaning and purpose. When I walked through the doors of this church over 25 years ago now, I didn't know if God was a feeling, a being, or a metaphor. But I knew very quickly this was the place where I wanted to search, to explore ideas of God and the divine as seen through this and other faith traditions. This place quickly became my oasis. I was making new friends, enjoying fellowship activities, and attending thought-provoking adult RE classes. It was great. Then I remember the first time I heard some members who were in leadership positions talking about an issue the board was dealing with, or perhaps it was certain leaders they were having difficulties with. Anyway, I don't remember. All I wanted to do, though, was put my fingers in my ears, close my eyes, and go, la, 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 la. Don't mess up my paradise. I don't want to know about the business of the church. Before long, though, I found myself on the Social Concerns Committee, as it was known then, because of my passion for LGBT issues and environmental justice. Then I was on the Stewardship Committee, and that led me to the Finance Committee during a very challenging time in our church's history. Soon I realized those difficult issues and the conversations I didn't want to know about were not just where the real work of this church happens, but where my faith was being built. I taught RE classes. For a while, I joined the board and was eventually elected president. Perhaps the most rewarding work I've done here was serving on the Ministerial Search Committee that brought Reverend Mary Catherine Moore as FUUN's 4th settled minister. Sure, there have been times where I've teetered on the verge of burnout, but I've given all this time and a bit of money to this church because it and you have given me so much more. The lessons in leadership, the friendships, and the ministry have enriched my life and fed my soul. So after all of these years, I still may not know what all that God or the divine is or isn't. But if I were asked today by any Muslim, Christian, or Jew if I'd found God, my answer would be yes.
I'd like to invite you all to take a deep breath. Become more fully present to this sacred space, both inside and outside, to this gathered community, and to yourself. As you become more fully present to yourself, you may become more aware of those moments from the last days or hours that you bring here with you, especially those moments that struck your spirit at its core. If any of you have such a profound joy, sorrow, or concern that you'd like to make present to this gathered community, you're invited to do so. Our lay minister this morning, Jack Bleak, has stones which you're invited to place in this bowl of water that symbolizes our gathered community. It includes water that the membership brought here this year. And if you would like Jack and myself to read of that joy of concern, please write it out on one of these yellow slips of paper in your pew as legibly as possible, please, and hand it to me when you place your stone. Thank you. And I'd like to invite everyone to hold this joy, these concerns and sorrows, as well as all those that are silent in your lips, in the spirit of prayer. Spirit of life and love. We hold one another in times of celebration and in desolation. And as we do that, in ways both with our heart, but also with our hands, we learn, practice the day-to-day work of caring for this world. We hold in our hearts today every single person who is celebrating and suffering, because we know from day to day that changes for us all. Those we know, our neighbors throughout this city, many whom we do not know. We hold those in our heart throughout this nation, for we know that we have different opinions, different experiences, and yet We all celebrate and we all suffer. And at times we move our view out across this whole world. People that we can't even imagine living lives beyond our ken. We hold them too in our hearts. And as we hold them and survey the whole world, we think of this planet upon which we all depend, upon which many of us find the divine, find true interconnection and love. And we hold its suffering in our hearts as well. May our prayers move from our hearts to our hands as we serve the world together. Blessed be, and amen. At this time, our offering will be received. This month, our Share the Plate is going to Nurses for Newborns, which you can read about in your order of service. Some of you, as we pass the plate, would rather donate electronically, and it explains how to do that. Is that, I don't even see it here in the order of service. Is it in the outside cover? But all you have to do is go on to our website, thefirstuunash.org. Not the, forget the the. And it's even easier than I said, and go to Give. And I want to thank you so much for your ongoing generosity.
So our reading this morning comes from this collection, Stories of the Spirit, Stories of the Heart, Parables of the Spiritual Path from Around the World, edited by Jack Kornfield and Christina Feldman. And this is labeled as a, quote, contemporary Christian story, so I don't know the author. And it goes as such. A pious man who tried to live by God's will dwelled in a valley out in the country. One day, a great rain came to his valley, and the flood waters rose. The man went from the first floor to the second floor as the rains continued. Finally, he climbed out onto the roof. A rescue boat came around and offered to row him to safety, but the man sent them away, saying, "I have full faith in God. I pray and trust God will care for me." So the rowboat left. The storm continued. It rained further, and soon the floodwaters were up to his neck. A second rowboat came to rescue him and again was dismissed in the same way. "I have faith and trust in God. I pray and I believe." And the rowboat was sent away. It continued to rain, and the water got so high that the man could barely breathe through his mouth and nose. At that point, a helicopter flew over and let down a ladder to rescue him. "No, no," he cried out, using the same words. "I have faith in God, I pray and believe, and I trust, and I have followed God." And he sent the helicopter away as well. However, it continued to rain, the waters rose, and finally he was drowned. He went to heaven, and after a short period, he was granted an interview with God. He went in and was seated directly in front of the Almighty, and then began to ask, "I had so much faith in you. I believed in you so fully. I prayed and tried to follow your will. I just don't understand." At that point, God scratched God's head and said, "I don't understand either. I sent you 2 rowboats and a helicopter." I don't do this very often, like maybe once every 3 or 4 years. So I'm not that skilled at the moving things along part of it. So thank you, Gail. Okay, meditation. At this time, I will offer a brief spoken prayer followed by a period of silence, and you can use that time however you feel most comfortable. So let us pray. We pray for the power to be gentle, the strength to be forgiving, the patience to be understanding, and the endurance to accept the consequences to holding on to what we believe to be right. May we put our trust in the power of good to overcome evil and the power of love to overcome hatred. We pray for the vision to see and the faith to believe in a world emancipated from violence and a new world where fear shall no longer lead us to commit injustice. Let peace fill our hearts, our world, and our universe. Amen.
I'd like to invite you to join me in singing number 1032, Dauna Naish. I'd like to sing this in call and response style so you can hear the Arabic words right before you sing them. So I would sing Dauna Naish, and then you would sing Dauna Naish. Dauna Naish, Dauna Naish, Bisalam.
namut, dauna namut, bisalam. Dauna naish, bisalam. Dauna naish, biamam, dauna. Nansish, nansish, alam. Dauna namut. Bisalam. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you here this morning. As a UU minister affiliated with this congregation for the past 20 plus years, I always appreciate the opportunity to share a bit of my ministry with you. As I mentioned earlier, I don't do this very often, so may the words of my mouth, If my face is new to you, or to catch you up if you already know me, just a little quick Laurel as a minister recap. In 1996, I graduated from Vanderbilt and was ordained by this congregation in 1997. I then spent the first 9 to 10 years of my ministry, more or less, at the VA Medical Center here in Nashville, working in various roles ranging from a chaplain to a readjustment counseling therapist, substance abuse counselor, and a few other positions before I closed out my time at the VA as a nurse care manager for Iraq and Afghan combat vets with traumatic brain injuries. Additionally, somewhere in that mix, I was a home care chaplain for Alive Hospice, which Holly, I think, is currently doing, another affiliated minister. Come the year 2005, I found myself back in graduate school at George Washington University in DC. I was working on a public health doctorate on health behavior. Specifically, I was interested in how people make the choices they do around their mental health. Things did not go as planned in my life. It seems that they rarely do. So I was flying frantically back and forth every week for classes for a year, and I just couldn't continue. So thankfully for me, the master's degree in nursing that I got at age 22 came in handy as I was able to transfer, and I went to UTK and ended up getting a PhD in nursing in global disaster nursing, specifically in the area of mental health, looking at how combat and violence impact mental health. So that's kind of how I got where I am today, more or less. In 2009, I took that sort of unusual combination of chaplaincy, mental health nursing, and public health experience, and I applied to work with Doctors Without Borders, also known as Médecins Sans Frontières, so MSF is the acronym that we use because Doctors Without Borders is too long to say, so working with MSF. And over the past 9 to 10 years, I have spent the vast majority of my time either working as a mental health activity manager in projects globally around the world, or it seems like driving around the Midwest visiting family members, either before going or directly coming back. So being here with you this morning is no mean feat. It took gracious flexibility on the part of Gail and the worship committee, as well as their willingness to entertain the fact that I actually might not be here on this Sunday morning. In fact, as I think Gail mentioned, or maybe she didn't, maybe it's in the order of service. In a few weeks, I will be on a plane headed to Zhytomyr, Ukraine for 9 months to be part of an Doctors Without Borders pilot project. My role there will be mentoring, managing, teaching, supervising, supporting Ukrainian nurses, social workers, and psychologists who they themselves are supporting patients and families through the grueling process of receiving treatment for extremely drug-resistant tuberculosis or multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. Somewhat unusual for MSF, Doctors Without Borders, and certainly very unusual for former Soviet Union countries. We will be offering a holistic patient care approach. This means addressing the physical, psychological, and spiritual needs of those we're working with. An individual's substance use disorder, HIV status, or lack of bus fare to get to the clinic will be just as important and receive the same time and attention as their treatment for TB. So it's kind of a nice melding of my background to land in that place. During other years that I've worked with MSF, I have found myself sleeping on the ground in a tent in South Sudan for 6 months. I liken that to a camping trip that just won't end. Providing mental health care to primarily members of the Ngasana tribe from Sudan who came down to South Sudan as refugees. Other times I shared a house with 13 other different foreigners just within spitting distance of the Syrian border, such that we could see, hear, and feel the barrel bombs being dropped across just over the hill in Syria. It was difficult. During my years with MSF, I have lived and worked with people from a multitude of nations, from Tunisia to India, Nepal, France, Germany. I tried to count how many different countries, and I think it's close to 30. The vast majority of us stay focused on the mission of MSF, which involves the provision of care and assistance to populations in distress, to victims of natural and man-made disasters, and to victims of armed conflicts. We do so irrespective of gender, race, political persuasion, creed, religion, and any of it. Through our work, we consistently maintain neutrality and impartiality in the name of universal medical ethics and the right to humanitarian assistance. And respecting our own personal, professional code of ethics, we maintain complete independence from all political, economic, or religious powers. So that means when we're home at night, the team eating together, we can carry on about Trump or Berlusconi or whoever, but when we're at work, nothing. Additionally, we believe that the principles of impartiality and neutrality are not synonymous with silence. To quote words said when MSF received the Nobel Peace Prize 20 years ago, "We are not sure that words can save lives, but we do know that silence can certainly kill." Speaking out, witnessing, is an important part of our work. So that's a very long-winded introduction, as well as like a Doctors Without Borders 101, to get me to the part of the sermon that I wanted to share with you about a diversity of beliefs. So the question that I'm posing is, knowing that we hold a wide diversity of beliefs and understandings around the mystery of life, how do we make space for the experience of others who hold beliefs so vastly different from our own? And does doing doing so then enrich our own understandings of ourselves? Well, those are two big questions, and I have a third tucked away. But to begin, let me say that my interest in engaging around others with different religious beliefs goes back to the time when I was in divinity school. In the mid-1990s, Nashville was still at that time a fairly homogeneous community. It was shifting a bit, but during the early 90s, it was still primarily Christian, basically. Having grown up in the Chicago area and working as a nurse there, that was my first career, nursing before ministry, I knew that there were differences in how people of various faiths experienced illness and understood death. So in my usual full-on fashion, I was determined to bring a greater awareness of this religious diversity to my little piece of Nashville. Therefore, it's no surprise that my divinity school research project was entitled Methods for Sensitizing Healthcare Professionals to Issues of Cultural and Religious Pluralism. So when putting that whole thing all together, I first came across the writings of Diana Eck, Professor Diana Eck. She is a renowned professor of comparative religion at Harvard University. She is the author of Encountering God, which was first published in 1993. In her book, she makes statements and poses questions which still intrigue me 25 years later. She asks us to envision a world without religious violence, suggesting that we, and I'm quoting here, explore the unique access to the divine or ultimate, which is granted by different religions. Inquire into the possible value for our own journey, still grounded in our own faith traditions, yet shifting our relationships to other faiths from threat to value. Her writing is heartfelt, and it's urging us to dialogue with those who are religiously diverse and to use that as a springboard for understanding the need to dialogue with those who are politically, socially, economically, and culturally different from us. In 2006, Professor Eck founded the Pluralism Project, which seeks to find ways to support pluralism in our society. The project is built around 4 fundamental aspects of religious pluralism, all of which seem to have seeds in RUU principles from my perspective. Professor Eck is a Methodist. I understand the definition of pluralism to land it more in the verb category. So I think sometimes we think of pluralism as an adjective, but for me, I'm thinking it as a verb. It's an action as opposed to a static state that is achieved simply by mixing individuals with different opinions and beliefs. I base my verb theory on the following bits taken from Diana Eck's writings. First, she states, pluralism is not diversity alone, but energetic engagement with diversity. Mere diversity without real encounter and relationship frequently results in increasing tensions in our societies. In my experience, a very stark example of this is the Rohingya people living in basically Rakhine State, Myanmar. The Muslim Rohingya, living in a primarily Buddhist country, would be the noun form of pluralism, of diversity. As from what I saw, the Muslim Rohingya have been barely tolerated. Mostly, they've been a disenfranchised people subjected to mind-numbing policies put forth by the majority Buddhist government and military. Granted, there is a social and political history which is quite complex, with colonialism, nationalism, and poverty interlaced throughout the story. However, none of that complexity negates the fact that in late late August of 2017, the Myanmar military carried out what the UN has labeled as a genocide. It resulted in the deaths of at least 10,000 Rohingya, with 800,000 crossing the border into Bangladesh seeking safety. Today, those 800,000 people who joined 200,000 who were already there remain in sprawling refugee camps in southeast Bangladesh. I was in Bangladesh earlier this year, and one of my colleagues said, "Be prepared. Have you seen a camp like this?" I'm like, "I've seen refugee camps." They said, no. This is like the ocean. It just goes on and on and on, and you cannot see the end of it. And that was a very apt description of these 100,000 Rohingya who are now in Bangladesh. Living and working around Sitwe, so I was also, the year before, I was living and working in Myanmar for 6 months. I was exposed to the dangers of assuming that the presence of diversity lends itself to anything positive without energetic engagement. One might wonder how it is that Buddhist monks, with their peace-loving ways, could have been part of such horrifying acts. Granted, there is so much more to the story, as many see the genocide not so much as a clash between religions, but more of a cultural identity, and one that was engineered by the government in an attempt to keep its grip on power. Bottom line, presence of the diversity, the Muslims and Buddhists together, with active steps to keep the groups physically apart, did nothing to enhance relationships, but in contrast, actually increased tensions between the two groups. The second aspect that Eck identifies is pluralism as not just tolerance, but the active seeking of understanding across lines of differences. Tolerance creates a community that has a chance of actually functioning on a day-to-day, but it does not invite Christians, Muslims, Hindus, Jews, and secularists to begin to remove the ignorance of one another. It leaves in place the stereotypes, the half-truths, and the fears that underlie old patterns of division and of violence. In many places throughout the world where I have worked, this lack of understanding has been the original start point for the ongoing conflict and violence. The third fundamental aspect, pluralism does not consist of relativism, but it rather embraces the encounter of commitment. We are not called to cast aside our own personal beliefs, commitments, and understandings, but rather we are called to hold those up to the light, to see the differences in relationship to one another. This is a bit like a light coming through this stained glass. I think Reverend Frank Forrest Church used this example. We hold our place in the mosaic of colors, keen to see how the light shining through from another angle might shed light on the space that we hold. Fourth, and the last fundamental aspect of pluralism, is that it is based on dialogue. Eck writes, "The language of pluralism is that of dialogue and encounter, give and take, criticism and self-criticism. Dialogue means both speaking and listening, and that process reveals both common understandings and real differences. Dialogue does not mean everyone at the table will agree with one another. Pluralism involves the commitment to have a place at the table with the others who are bringing their commitment to be at the table." So there we have it. 4 fundamental aspects of pluralism, which comprise one possible, there are many, blueprints by which to understand and begin to answer the first question I posed. The question was, knowing that we hold a wide diversity of beliefs and understandings, how do we make space for the experience of others who hold beliefs so vastly different from our own? Using pluralism as a verb involves taking some risk on our part. It involves a focused, conscious engagement to know and be known. I would suggest that part of discovering our own being is beginning to see ourselves in others, beginning to understand the other in order to better understand ourselves. A few months ago, I had an unexpected flash of humbling comprehension around pluralism as it relates to my own actions. And I'm going to share this with you just as highlight what I'm talking about. This all happened one afternoon when I was actually stuck in traffic right here on Woodmont. It was somewhere around 4 o'clock, so you can imagine how long it took me to get from Granny White to Hillcon. So I had a lot of time to think. And my mind was wandering here and there, waiting for the lights to change and the traffic to slowly poke along. For some reason, I had my female colleagues from Jordan and my male colleagues from Bangladesh on my mind. I believe the common denominator was that there were new babies in each of those places that had been born to colleagues, and I'd had some communication. So earlier in the week, that same week, I had been deeply, deeply moved by a WhatsApp video that one of my mental health colleagues sent me of her husband, who I also know because he was a nurse in one of the projects. He was holding one of their newborn twins shortly after birth, and from the looks of it, he was singing to him. My understanding of the video was clarified when I got the message from her, and she said, "This is part of our religion. The father reads parts of the Quran to the baby, so it will be one of the first pure things he hears in the beginning of his life." Admittedly, a small, tiny part of me bristled that it was the father reading the Quran to the infant and not his mother, but that thought very quickly passed with a surge of tenderness that rose in me as I thought of the love surrounding these two new lives and how their parents, very early on, were attempting to embrace them in all that is holy and right and good. So somehow, my thoughts took a path from that loving family and my gender role conversation in my head to the mental health team in Kutupalong, Bangladesh. When I was in Bangladesh, I've been there twice working for long periods of time. I was there in 2012, 2013. The mental health team consisted of 4 men and 1 woman, all Muslim, some a little bit more liberal than others, but all much more religiously conservative than my colleagues in the Middle East. So I recall when I first arrived, there was some scuttlebutt from the team about how I could be away from my husband for 10 months at a time. It was something they were taking in, not challenging me, or I didn't feel like they were judging me. They were simply trying to understand how that would work, because that was unusual for them. In turn, I had some fine-tuning to do around my judgments, misconceptions, and irritation around the cultural and religious expectations of women in conservative, rural, southeast Bangladesh. Their women's roles in public space are quite limited. It took the team, of which I was a part, months to begin to trust one another as we learned from each other. Relationships were formed, fears dropped away, and eventually we were able to sit together and use our diversity as a catalyst for expanding our own individual understandings of each other. We talked cautiously and very gingerly about generally taboo subjects such as sexuality and gender roles. These discussions were oftentimes stimulated by events that had transpired as we worked together throughout the day. At one point, I have a very clear memory of this. I had become highly annoyed with my then single male translator, we'll call him Abdul, who very politely declined to assist me in helping a young woman who turned out to be single, a fact I hadn't deemed important or noteworthy at the time. He declined to help me get her to stand up after she had collapsed upon hearing the hard news about the death, I believe it was her brother that died. I was there in this crowded clinic, people all around, trying to move her to a more private space, and I couldn't do it by myself. Abdul stood a respectful distance away, seemingly not comprehending what a time I was having. I actually remember him standing with his hands behind his back, just looking at me. Eventually, I lost my patience, which is unfortunately one of my growing edges, and I hollered at him to go get somebody to help me. He returned with another man, but it was a married man, it turns out. Later, after we had found family members to support the young woman and we were gathered to review our day and plan for the next day, I asked Abdul what had been up with his unwillingness to assist me earlier in the day. Hopefully I put it a little bit more diplomatic than that, but I don't know, probably not, because I have such a vivid memory of the interchange. So it's reminded me time and time again not to make assumptions about individuals' particular choices of action that might seem unreasonable to me. So it seemed that, as a single man, he understood that he is forbidden to physically touch any female other than a close family member. Oh, well, that totally explains what was going on. No doubt, I initially had some internal chatter about my judgments and thoughts, and no doubt he had some internal chatter about my judgments and thoughts. However, I like to believe that those two interchanges contributed to what the process theologian John Cobb calls mutual transformation. Listening to understand and to learn. The heartfelt discussions between my colleagues and me do not mean that we will always agree. I still wanted Abdul to help me with that lady, that didn't change. But only that we will understand more clearly. In the process, there is the possibility to engage and perhaps begin to replace ignorance and stereotypes with deeper knowledge of one another. These processes of engagement lend themselves to the language of mutuality and not of power. In essence, for me, those two instances I just described, relationships superseded individual beliefs. In many cases, my own personal faith has been enriched and enhanced by the care and attention I receive from others and community and people who are different than myself. However, there is a major footnote to those two interchanges I just described. Let's go back to me sitting in the car in the traffic. I was still on Woodmont at that time. I was mulling over these warm memories and interactions with colleagues whose beliefs differ so greatly from mine, no doubt thinking, oh, you've come a long way, Interjected in that tender moment, just like lightning, was this flash of understanding. I was more than willing to engage and build relationships with religiously and socially conservative Muslims and Buddhists, but I was dreading an upcoming encounter with a faith-filled conservative Christian from down the road. Already imagining the friction of our differences, wondering how I was going to keep my judgments in check. It was a very teachable moment for me right there. If I aim to advance pluralism, I need to step back and recall that tolerance is simply not enough. Essentially, it is more important for me to know what I see than to see what I think I know. Relationship building is part and parcel of this spiritual journey of ours. It expands our sense of who we are and how we are in this shared world. God, the divine, the mystery, spirit of life, is present among us and between us in a variety of sometimes surprising forms. It could be a helicopter, a rowboat coming to the door when the water is rising, the lyric chant of a father reciting the Quran to his newborn son, or a single unmarried translator adhering to his belief that it's not proper for him to touch another woman, or an individual whose beliefs on politics and gender roles in the United States differ so vastly from some of us here. Given that as you use, we are people who choose, We can take the risk and engage in advancing pluralism. We can choose to grow past tolerating those who have beliefs which are poles apart from our own, and begin to hold our own differences in relationship as opposed to isolation. To close with the words of Diana Eck, we share our communities and our world with men and women who worship in various ways, who base their judgments on different authorities, who recognize differing revelations, who speak of God in strikingly different ways, or who do not speak of God at all. Our task is to learn to collaborate with one another on issues that none of us can solve alone.
I invite you to rise in body or in spirit and join me in our closing hymn, number 189 in the gray hymnal. Hymn number 189, Light of Ages and of Nations. Light of ages and of nations, every race and every time has received thine inspirations, glimpses of thy true sublime, always spirits in rapt vision, past the heavenly veil within, always hearts bowed in contrition, found salvation from their sin, reason's noble aspiration, truth in growing clearness saw, conscience spoke its condemnation, or proclaimed eternal law, while thine inward revelations told thy saints their prayers were heard. Prophets to the guilty nations spoke thine everlasting word. Lo, that word abideth ever, revelation is not sealed, answering now to our endeavor, truth and right are still. That which came to ancient sages, Greek, barbarian, Roman, Jew, written in the soul's deep pages, shines today forever new.
Please join me for the chalice extinguishing, the words of which can be found at the bottom of your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
And our closing words this morning are from Rumi. Maybe some of you know these. Let the beauty you love be what you do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. Go forth, doing what you love, witness to our shared faith. Amen.